complain, can we? No, no. It just comes as a shock. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good to see you.
Hi,
I'll give
Rita.
everybody a minute or so to come on in. How is everyone for a Monday? I hope you had a good weekend. I feel like I had a very full weekend, which is great. I went to see that new movie, The Devil Wears Prada 2. Has anyone seen that? Not yet. It's so good. I went. My daughter got me that as a Mother's Day gift, and so we went yesterday, and it was so fantastic. Like the fashion is just amazing. Like I love, yeah, Jen. Like it was wow. Like the fashion in there is pretty amazing if that's your thing. And Meryl Streep, that performance, the woman is 76 years old. Like hands down to her, right? She's phenomenal. You know, fun fact about Meryl Streep. I've been reading a book, What to Make of a Life. We just mused. It's the author of Jim Collins. It's the author of the author of Good to Great. So he's written a book called What to Make of a Life, and he looks at some prominent people in history, but he looks at particular in Meryl Streep's career, and she's interesting fact. I don't know if you know this, but Meryl Streep's majority of her Academy Awards have been won post the age of 50. So it's a good reminder that when we think we've, kind of achieved our peak at a particular point, we have not. The woman's nearly 80. She's phenomenal. So I'm inspired by Meryl. Hope you all are too. But go and see The Devil Wears Prada. It's amazing. And if you like New York and Milan, it's just beautiful, like really beautiful cinematography from those places too. Right, that's probably enough on The Devil Wears Prada and everything else. I hope you're all well. In the chat, could you please just let us know? Just going to move the chat over here. Where are you coming in from today on our call? Where are you in this great country of ours? I think everybody's today. And be Rebecca, beautiful. Let us know where you're coming in from.
That'll be the next.
All right. Sorry, Rebecca, I muted you. Sorry, it kept on coming up. Please feel free to unmute when we're absolutely in conversation. Port Macquarie, New South Wales, Tasmania. Look, we've got the country represented today, which is off Coffs Harbour. Beautiful, beautiful part of the world. Beautiful. Keep popping those places in so we know where everybody's coming in from. Thank you for joining us for today's masterclass. So today's masterclass is centered around the topic of trust, but in particular, trust in this age of skepticism. So we're skeptical, right? There's a lot to be skeptical about. Today's not going to be about skepticism, but it is going to be about how we rebuild trust, sustain trust and maintain trust in our teams and in our organisation. If I haven't met you before, my name is Rita Chincotta. Really, really pleased and very honoured that you've given me an hour of your lunchtime today. If it is lunchtime, it's not going to be in Perth, Julie. I reckon it'll be just after breakfast. So thank you for joining. My name is Rita Chincotta, as I said, and I run a business called The Deliberate Leader, and we bring you these masterclasses every month with our great pleasure. And we do lots of different topics. And so this one is rebuilding trust. If you want to jump on to any of our previous topics, hit our events page and see them there, and you can also access the recordings on YouTube, which we can send you a link to. All right, without further ado, I'd like to welcome you into the space today and acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country, and I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to Aboriginal elders, past, present, and emerging. Those of you that might be joining the call that have Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander background, but I also want to acknowledge and pay respect to the country and the land that you are on. This is a picture of our beautiful Yarra River that runs through Melbourne. And it doesn't always look too beautiful. Sometimes it's a murky brown, but it is beautiful just to walk along there. And on my morning walk this morning, I wasn't by the Yarra River, but I by lots of trees and greenery. And I was saying to Jay, it's been like a very intense morning. But that hour was beautiful just to kind of acknowledge where I am, acknowledge land, even though it's rainy and cloudy, and acknowledge that it's a brand new week. So I hope you can do the same just in a little moment as you look at that image there. All right. What are we covering today in this hour? So as I said, it's rebuilding trust in the age of skepticism. So we will look at trust in leadership, and we will look at some statistics, in terms of what's happening within organisations, but also within some of our other institutions. So for example, government sentiment and those kinds of things, looking at the Edelman Trust Barometer. We're going to be, looking at why are employees skeptical. You may be leaders, but I'm sure you're also employees of organisations. So why is there an increasing level of skepticism? We don't need to dig too far to find out why. We're going to be looking at, behaviours. So as leaders, what are some practical things that we can do to really build trust and sustain trust in our teams? And in particular, in our teams, but in conversation, in those everyday practices that we, engage with our people in, and how we can strengthen that trust. The role of team dynamics plays a huge, factor in trust. So trust is not just one-to-one, one person to another person, but it's also around team dynamics culture. And what can we do as leaders to influence that? And then finally, looking at some really practical ways that we can increase, I'm sure you're doing this already, but leading with transparency, accountability, and consistency. I welcome comments in the chat and also questions in the chat as we go through. So I'll be scanning that at different times. We've got some polls throughout today's session, and also some different questions just to get you to reflect. And hopefully some time for some Q&A too as we finish up. All right, we'll go to our first poll now. Jen is standing by from our team, ready to launch that. But what's the fastest way for a leader to lose trust? And in a minute, I think you'll receive a little prompt on the screen, hopefully. Because I know that, as we think about trust in organisations, we're currently leading an environment which there's a lot of fake news. There's a lot of skepticism because of, what's happening to roles and what's happening to jobs as AI comes and takes our jobs. So it's no wonder that we're feeling an increasing level of fatigue because of the level of skepticism, but also this uncertainty. So I'm interested in what's the fastest way for leaders to lose trust at the moment. Haven't we got that poll up yet? Oh, here it goes. Thank you, Jen. So if you could go ahead and just answer whichever one you think, and we'll see those results coming through as people answer live. And that list is not exhaustive, obviously, but it's going to give us a good read on what we think. I think there's a clear winner so far, right? That inconsistency, so saying one thing and doing another, closely followed by poor communication. Oh, poor communication's getting up there too. If you haven't answered, there's a few of you that haven't, feel free to go ahead and do so if you want to. All right. And I think we might end the poll there, Jen. Beautiful. So we can see that by far that saying one thing and doing another, so that inconsistency and then followed by poor communication. And then it's pretty consistent across the other ones around avoiding difficult conversations, inconsistent behaviour, lack of accountability. I think if we go share results, it'll give us something. We can see all that. All right. We can probably, I'll let you move that, Jen. Actually, we'll make sure that Jen's co-host. So you can see there that it's that inconsistency. And I think that feels about right. You're all telling me that. It's certainly one of the things that is noted in the literature around one of the problems with building trust. So when we have leaders that are inconsistent and that, let me see if we can just remove that poll from there now, and that do one thing and say another, it actually creates that level of almost instability. So it doesn't give people a nice, stable platform on which to feel that they belong to part of a team and to really connect in with their leader and connect in with others. All right, let me see if we can just remove that because I don't need that anymore on the screen. How do we do that, Jen? There we go. Done. So saying one thing and doing another, as we've seen. All right. So what's happening in that trust landscape? As I said, we don't need to look too far to understand why people are becoming more and more skeptical, because they are. Maybe you're feeling that in your organisations too. Um, what we know is that the leadership has changed. We know that once upon a time when we were training in leadership and facilitating in leadership, we certainly didn't talk as much about things like empathy. We didn't talk very much about some of those things that you see on the screen because they're all relatively new, although change fatigue has been there in some way, shape or form. Workforce uncertainty has always been there too. But we know that particularly in the last probably 3 or 4 years, we've had a lot of geopolitical upheaval. Some of you are impacted by that more than others because of the type of organisations that you work in. But we are facing economic pressures. Budget may or may not have affected your businesses, let alone you personally last week in budget announcements. That change fatigue, is there. And I'm almost sick of talking about it, as I'm sure you're sick of hearing about it, but it is there, right? So the changes that are coming through thicker and faster than what they ever have before. And for leaders, AI disruption, as it says, workforce uncertainty, increased scrutiny from different stakeholders, particularly if you are in a business, where you've got to respond to lots of different masters, and that declining institutional trust. So whatever those factors, however many of those may impact you or not, we are leading in a time where these kind of factors, I think, create a lot of that instability. But also as a leader, if you're not equipped to message and have messages and clear communications around these and clear strategies around how you're dealing with them, that makes your job of building that trust and maintaining that trust with your people that much harder. And I'm sure if I did a deep dive with you in your various organisations, you may have all of these things, but you'd probably have a bunch of other things in relation to why leadership is more and more challenging. We know that in terms of trust, it erodes over time. And it's built over time too. So the way that I like to look at trust is through this lens of trust credits and trust debits. And so if you and I, actually all of us, let's pretend we are all part of one organisation, one team, and we are working together and we're collaborating, we're communicating, we're strategizing, we're operationalizing, we're doing all the things, right? Invariably, we will do things together and one-on-one that strengthen those trusts or strengthen the trust. And that's where we've got trust credits being deposited into a make-believe trust account. But from time to time, we're also going to do things, maybe not maintain a commitment, maybe not be as clear and transparent as we could be. Maybe we're going to, make a commitment and then break it. Or maybe we're going to make a commitment that we know we can't maintain. Maybe we're not always going to communicate, as clearly as what we could. And the list goes on. Those kinds of actions are what creates a trust debit. And so we are constantly, if you think about this like a bank account, and we're putting things into this trust account when we do things that build and maintain trust. But also from time to time, and we are probably not going to do this intentionally, we will make some withdrawals or a debit. And it's important to start with that frame, I think, because when we talk about trust, it's not this thing that we can just have there all the time as stable. It cannot be, because we're human, right? So we will say and do things that have an impact on others, either intentionally, hopefully not intentionally. And also sometimes, we might perceive that we've communicated clearly, but the other person doesn't think that we have, or our teams don't think that we have. And therefore they will see that as a debit, if you like, or a trust deficit. So there are lots of things that we could do. Yes, we've got all these macro factors, and these are what I would call more macro factors that are on the screen, but there are also things that we can do at a leadership level, at a local leadership level, that really have the ability to maintain trust. All right. If we look at Edelman and the Trust Barometer, I'm not sure how many of you look at. Can I just have a thumbs up if you are familiar with what Edelman is, and if you look at the Trust Barometer? Okay, I can't see any thumbs up, so I'm going to assume that that's no. The Edelman Trust Barometer, it's worthwhile if you're a leader diving into this. So you can go onto the website. If you just Google Edelman Trust Barometer, it will come up. The most recent data they have published is 25. They don't have 26. Obviously, we're in 26, so they've finalised last calendar year. And Edelman run surveys globally. And what you can see there on the screen is a survey, one of their surveys that they ran, 33,000 plus respondents across 28 countries, including Australia. They capture sentiment of leaders in organisations, but they also capture institutional sentiment. So you will see when you dive into the data, trust in terms of how much we trust how much we trust different institutions, how much we trust our media, etc. And so I wanted to pull some of this data for you today, specifically around business and leaders. And you can see there that it's not diabolical data. I've seen it looking worse in over different years. But 76% of the population that responded said they trust their employer, which is pretty good. I think that's actually pretty high. And that also could be when, from a macro environment perspective, when everything is feeling uncertain, we tend to go really local. So community, our workplaces, which form a lot, for many of us, it forms our community. And we tend to kind of go back to what I call controlling the controllables. And so we trust what we can kind of connect with and see and feel. And, employers seem to be doing a good job. We're not scores in the 90s, but it's also not diabolical. 70% believe leaders mislead people. So this is not great. So they're not great for leaders at a local level, but misleading. And, we can't dive into the data, but you can imagine that the types of questions there are probably around communication, around commitments and promises, etc. But 70% believe that leaders mislead people. That statistic is not great. 61% feel a grievance towards institutions. So this is whether they've, raised a formal grievance or not, but they've got a problem. They've got a problem with something, their institutions are doing. 62% trust business overall. That's not overly high. And 80% expect business leaders to speak up. And this is, taking a position on a particular issue. And that's really, really difficult to do in the political landscape that we are in. And I don't just mean local politics, right? So if you think about the number of issues that are happening, globally, it's really hard for leaders to speak up. So let's assume that they're not requiring us to speak up on those kind of issues, but even at a local issue in terms of what's happening. So the Edelman Trust Barometer just gives us a bit of a feeling, around what's happening in sentiment. If then I go into more Australia-specific findings, overall, Australia has flipped into what Edelman call the distrust territory. So that we're feeling that level of distrust, and that's not surprising. I'm not sure if it's surprising to you to hear that. Our trust index sits at 49. If we think about global comparisons, Australians report higher scepticism towards leadership and institutions. Our quality of life is pretty good, even though we are in a cost of living crisis. But all other things being equal, our quality here is still pretty good. So interestingly, we're reporting higher scepticism towards leadership and institutions. 62% of Australians, and we saw that, actually, we didn't see that. 62% of Australians report moderate or high grievance levels, and that's against the comparison that we saw, which is 61% on the graph that we can see. And Australians are increasingly concerned about misinformation, fairness, and leadership credibility. Now, that statement there is not just referring to our, how we feel about politics overall, right? This is also leadership sentiment, organisational sentiment. So, what's interesting, I guess, is that trust in employers is relatively high, other than they feel that we're misleading people. But trust is still relatively high, but it seems to be conditional on different things. So, the sentiment around employees and what they might be asking themselves is, can I trust leadership? Will leaders tell the truth? And I, sometimes when I read that statement, I always think about the timing of communication. So often I think one of the most challenging things for leaders to decide when we can communicate things and when we simply cannot. And what do we do with that? What's our holding statement? What do we convey to people? How do we still help them feel safe with the information that we do have without overcommitting or promising something that we cannot? They're thinking about, communication early and as early as you can. Will leaders be visible during uncertainty? We know that is a huge element of trust, people wanting their leaders to be visible. And will their behaviour match their messaging? So if you think about our earlier poll around one of the things, around leaders losing trust, the number one thing you said was that inconsistency, doing one thing and saying another. And employees are asking themselves right now, is their behaviour, leaders' behaviour, going to match what their messaging or what their comms are? So my question to you is, what do you think employees are skeptical about right now? So what I wouldn't mind, please, if you could pop in the chat, what are employees skeptical about in maybe your organisation, your industry, or maybe generally? What are they skeptical about right now? I'll leave it on that slide for now. AI, definitely, Tara. I went to a meeting the other day and the facilitator said, I promised I wouldn't say AI, but how could we avoid it in any conversation, hey? Yeah. What else are employees skeptical about right now? I'm just scanning the chat. No poll for this one. AI so far. Anything else? Yeah, job certainty. The government, I know. If you read the press over the weekend, and I think, the opposition's, I know that they've done their budget response, but they're in a bit of scramble state right now. Job certainty. Okay. So AI job certainty is coming through. Yeah. How long new changes implemented will stay? It's a really good one, Renee. One organisation that I worked with many years ago, and it's the higher education sector, but they described restructures in their organisations as just reshuffling deck chairs. So every now and again, we'll just reshuffle the deck chairs. And that's the thing, right? Because people are impacted by these changes, but then how long, do these changes actually stay? How long to maintain those changes before maybe we revert back to what we had? Okay. So organisational change was definitely the thing I was thinking about. AI, definitely another thing, and job security. Some of the other things I think are authenticity. So, leaders, when leaders are having conversations, not necessarily speaking in town halls, but when they're having conversations with their people, is there a level of authenticity and also transparency? How authentic, how transparent can they be? Do they have the skills and are they equipped to be authentic? Have they tuned into themselves? Are they self-aware enough? Things that came up and you might be thinking about too are accountability. If I had a bingo card whenever I'm designing a leadership program with an organisation, but accountability invariably always comes up as one of the key things that organisations want covered. And it's always an interesting one because with accountability, what is it that's blocking that accountability? And what role does trust play in that? Communication, I think, is another one, which might, you might also be thinking about. And culture. So the type of culture we're trying to create and that we want versus the culture that we can have based on where the organisation is at. That's going to play a big part in trust, right? The type of culture that you have. All right. So moving on from Edelman and just, why we think employees are a little bit skeptical right now. I can't do a masterclass on trust without showing you this proverb. And some of you may have seen this with me before if you've done anything with me before. This is a Dutch proverb and I think it's a great one. Trust arrives on foot, but leaves on horseback. If we were in a workshop together, actually, I might get someone to unmute. I'll do this with you. What do you think that means? You can either put it in chat or unmute. What does that mean? And do we have anyone with a Dutch background, by the way? I always like to ask that question when I flush this quote up. Does anyone have a Dutch?
I don't have a trust background. I mean, a Dutch background. But I think that means that it's slow to build trust, and it's really easy to slow to build trust and really easy to lose trust.
Spot on. Spot on. Is it Jill or
Yes.
Gil? Spot on. And it's exactly right. So when you're thinking about arriving on foot, that takes time. Could be a very pleasant journey, but it takes a lot of time. But when we're on horseback, it's a lot quicker. And it takes a long time to build. Yeah, exactly, Renee. Come in slow, but it can leave quickly. And often it leaves and we're not even aware of it. We haven't intentionally, maybe we don't think we've done something, but in that moment, trust is lost. So we're back to this notion of credits and debits, right, in our mind. Okay. So that's our little trust. I'm going to go forward. So in terms of leadership credibility, sometimes I will flash up the trust equation. Today I wanted to use something different with you and really focusing on, credibility in terms of trust, because credibility is a massive part of trust. And in fact, if you're familiar with any of David Meister's work, so he wrote a book called The Trusted Advisor. As part of his trust equation, he has credibility as one of those key components. To complete that equation for you, I'm not showing you that today, but he also has reliability. So if we're looking at his work, he says trust is made up of credibility, reliability, and then intimacy. And what he means by intimacy, it's the quality and frequency of our connection. So, how much time are we spending with our people? And this is not about, spending all of it as face-to-face time and being in each other's faces, but it's about an appropriate time. If doing everything in a way that's remote or in a way where we don't have that action time with them, where we're talking about their goals, their development, a frame I like to use is highlights, lowlights, and insights, then potentially we're impacting our ability to build trust with our people. So taking Meister's work and his focus on credibility, we're going to go a little deeper into credibility today. We're going to look at consistency plus competence plus character, and then helps us to maintain and sustain trust. So what do we mean when we say consistency? Now, we've covered this right up front today, right, in our first poll. The number one factor that came through from all of you where leaders lose trust is when we're inconsistent. We say one thing and we do another. And as I said, we don't always mean to do that. People are busy, they've got big jobs and big responsibilities, and sometimes we might make a commitment, can't keep it. But know that when we do that, we're going to be, withdrawing some of those trust credits and turning them into deficits. So trust in a team and even one-on-one grows when leaders, we follow through, we stay visible, communicate regularly, not just in kind of formal, emails or newsletter things, but we're just, we're being visible and we're communicating. We're behaving predictably, right? So this is that consistency factor that comes back, and remaining calm under pressure. Now, the remaining calm under pressure, I think is an important one, but I don't want you to mix that as not being authentic, because for some people, it's really hard to do that, right? Some people do not have that ability. They don't have a calm presence. I'm not sure if that's resonating, for some of you. Some people have a really high dynamic energy. There's nothing calm about them, right? Now, that doesn't mean that, you shouldn't be a leader or can't be a leader, but there is something just slow and steady, right? Slow and steady wins the race. And for leaders, part of that is being grounded as you can be. This morning when I showed you the slide, just earlier, about 15 minutes ago actually, when I showed you the side of the Yarra River, as you're coming into the space, many of you have probably been at work for a few hours. And if you're anything like me this morning, as I was saying to Jay, it's been a hectic morning. So where you can be engaging strategies that just bring a calmness to you, whether it's looking at imagery, whether it's connecting, whether it's looking out the window or taking a few deep breaths, that helps you to be calm and consistent. It brings that awareness, and it just makes sure that our nervous system is in check, as relaxed as it can be, and not in a heightened state, because that actually impacts our decision making. So those factors absolutely will impact our consistency and our ability to just kind of steady state. Any questions or comments? I'm going to scan the chat. Please keep them coming through. It's masterclass today, less workshop. So I know it might not feel, very natural, but still we can do both. We can make this hybrid. So if you do have anything, please keep it coming through. All right, with consistency. Where do you think, so we've looked at those, those factors that promote that sense of consistency and trust. I'm interested in the chat, please. If you could answer this, where do leaders become inconsistent during pressure or change? Where have you seen that? Where do they become inconsistent? During pressure or change? One that comes off the top of my mind is where leaders are often messengers for others in the organizations. Perhaps they're translating new organizational strategy or a new direction. That pressure and that level of change can mean that sometimes they are inconsistent because maybe they've given their team another message. Yeah. Inconsistent high decisions. Yeah, Craig, I reckon you and I are on the same wavelength, I think, if I've not misinterpreted you. Yeah, changing priorities, definitely. Yeah, exactly. Katrina, same. I think same thinking there. I reckon that's one of the toughest jobs to do, right? When you're not necessarily the architect of the message, you've not come up with a strategy, but you are tasked to communicate. It's a great cascade, right? How many times have you had to do that in organizations? We've got to cascade the message. And cascading the message is a very efficient way to communicate, but it doesn't, it means that the message can be diluted and changed along the way. And Kelly says communication or two. Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. Sometimes maybe we're not picking a consistent communication style, or maybe we're not reading the room and picking the one that's most appropriate for the change. All right, let's move on to competence. This is probably one that's a bit more easier understood because we're talking here about competence, technical skill, behaviors. But employees, we know that they trust leaders who do make decisions. I know that sounds really obvious, but you'd be surprised the number of leaders that procrastinate with decisions and then just don't make the decision, and then leave teams in states of absolute flux because the team has no direction, end up doing something they've done or something that might not be right by customers or fellow employees. Employees trust leaders who create clarity. So particularly around change fatigue, which we've talked about, ambiguity in communication, a leader that can really quickly just go, hang on a minute, let's just reflect. What are we dealing with? These three things. Okay, these are the three positions that we've got on these three, right? So it's cutting through the noise, cutting through the politics and the bureaucracy, right? And different viewpoints, and just getting really, really clear about what you and the team. And I guess hand in hand with that is handling ambiguity. So that ambiguity is often what's creating the noise and the confusion, and leaders that can cut through that pretty quickly for their team have high levels of trust by their team. They address issues early and not always through formal consultation processes. And I know that some of you will have those as methods in your organizations to consult and to create change. But employees trust leaders that can have those conversations outside of formal consultation processes, where they really know, what the leader is thinking and how the leader is going to support them, and where they're leading confidently through uncertainty. And I think where leaders get into trouble with this, and I've seen it and I've experienced it myself, is where we try and almost, it's a fake it till you make it approach. And that's not leading confidently. That leading confidently through uncertainty is more often going to be about, I don't know, and saying to your team, I don't know. Or we don't have a position on that yet. Or if you do have a position, this is what we're going to be, doing or thinking or saying in relation to that. So employees trust leaders who are doing these things. And I'm interested in your views. What else would you add to that list? So we've talked about decisions and that clarity, obviously, ambiguity, addressing issues early, leading confidently through uncertainty. But what else would you add to that list? In terms of competence, you'll see there's nothing technical, right? There's no technical competence or being the best at your job or any of that. Yeah, being authentic. Yeah. I don't know. I got that wrong. We might have to, revise a position on that. Taking on feedback. Listening, yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. And having their back, that's that, that real level of support. Great. Great stuff coming through the chat. Have a scan through if you're not doing that. That transparency, which we've talked about. Yeah, approachable in adverse circumstances. And often for leaders, you're experiencing that adverse circumstance just like anybody else, and you're not immune to that. So your ability to be able to, be authentic, really connect in with people, I think during that time is important. And having that open door. Yeah. Good. It's a good set of things that we can add to that list. All right. So far we've looked at consistency. We've looked at competence, and this is all about credibility and increasing that credibility for trust. So finally now, we're going to look at character. This is more about you, right? So now we true behaviors, and I kind of alluded to it before as we were talking about competence, but competence is not, it's behaviors, but it's more than that. This is now you, and you will read through that list, and a lot of those words, I would be very surprised if they don't appear as words that are very similar to your value. Maybe you're all say no value. Rebecca there. Sorry, Rebecca, I've muted you again. If you're in an open air environment, just mute, and then obviously unmute if you want to answer a question, if there is one, or contribute to the conversation. But in terms of character, what employees are looking for is that integrity. So that comes back to consistency, doing what you say you're going to do, and your behaviors matching what you say to all audiences, not just, when you're managing up or when you're in front of your board or a subcommittee of your board. This is consistently, doing the right thing. I think one of my favorite quotes, integrity, I don't know where it came from, but it's doing the right thing when no one's watching. Right. So just knowing that there's the right thing to do and doing it. And a bugbear of mine, and I know this is really off the topic completely, but when you're walking your dog, take bags, right? And if you're in a park and no one's there, do the right thing anyway, just as you would if you're on a nature trip. To me, that, it's a good example of integrity. Honesty, obviously, fairness, empathy, accountability, and transparency. So people tolerate mistakes. They genuinely do. But what they don't tolerate is dishonesty, avoidance, or, a perception of self-protection. So where you are in it for yourself to protect yourself and maybe not them. Where we've got to do the thing that's kind of protecting your back, but not theirs. What else do you think employees want when we're talking about character and leadership character that strengthens trust? What else do you think they need? And some of those things that you've mentioned above, I reckon, are valid here, but I'm interested in what else. Positive attitude, yeah, they do want that. And that's really hard, I reckon, Peter, to maintain when in the face of change and everything else. It's a bit hard to be glass half full all the time. Consistency, which we've spoken about, consistency of behaviour, yeah. And I think if you change your position on something, or even I had a quick catch up with my team just before we jumped on this today, and the morning's been quite hectic, and so I could have said, "Oh, how are you? Good. How are you?" And off we go. But it strengthens, and I hope that it strengthens the trust in the team when you can really say what you're feeling. Because the worst thing is when you're looking frazzled, but you're saying, "Yeah, fine, good." It's people can read that, and they don't need to do much and dig very far to read it. Yeah, supporting development. Yeah, they do. They want that, absolutely. But they do watch leaders that support development, not always through formal courses, and being human-centered. Yeah. If only, hey, in most interactions, we could just bring the humanness to them. I agree, Jay. Okay. So with our equation, we're looking at leadership credibility. So we've got competence, character. We've got competence. Hang on, let me go back. Character and consistency. They're the three things that we're looking for in this particular equation. And if we do that, then we can be strengthening our leadership credibility, which increases trust. And I agree, Rebecca. So giving credit to the people at the coalface and being available and approachable, absolutely. All right. So let's move into now the area of difficult conversations. And We don't help ourselves by calling them difficult conversations, by the way. But I reckon this is a time where trust can really shine through. Because trust in easy moments, it's very easy to get trust credits. But it's in more challenging times where either you have to give a piece of feedback to somebody that you're concerned about in terms of how it might impact them, where you might be thinking they might disagree with you, where you may have an unpopular position. I reckon that's the time where trust is really tested and where it leaves really quickly on horseback if we don't manage those interactions and conversations well. So it is built, trust is built in how leaders handle hard moments, whether it's a tough conversation or anything else. And it grows when people see these things, when they see that leaders are addressing issues directly, speaking honestly, as we've spoken about. So honest came up as a character. Staying calm, which we've already spoken about too today, and that can be hard. So acknowledge that can be hard for people. It doesn't always come natural because I think some people just don't have that calm disposition. But if that is an area of opportunity or development for you, I reckon that's an important one to work on. It's not to make you inauthentic or different to who you are, but it is about even just helping you to become more self-aware, be more reflective, and just have a hold, a total hold on that situation. Explain decisions and balancing empathy with accountability, which is a big one. Is there anything else you would add to that list? Trust grows when leaders. What else would you add to that list? What are you looking for in your leader? And if you think about those times, and maybe, there've been more difficult times, but when your leader when you've developed a little bit more trust, listening to understand and not respond. Agree, Kelly. It's really hard to do, especially when you're the leader, hey? I reckon, as leaders, we are so trained to problem solve and remove barriers and blockages that our brains, they're kind of working to resolve what we perceive to be the problem. That's not always what people want from us. I worked with a colleague many, many years ago who, as a signal to stop talking in meetings, she would sit on her hands. And one day she let me in on a little secret, which then I knew, right? And luckily we were always working in the same team, so therefore on the same side. But had I been working on the other side, I would have known exactly when to find my moment, right, to influence. But she would sit on her hands. And that was a good reminder for her to listen, to understand, not respond. So you could hack your way to listening more to understand if you needed to. Taking responsibility. Seeking input from others, Emily. Okay.
Well, what another second or oppression border from previous.
Right. Sorry, Rebecca, muting you again. All right. So now I'm going to stay on difficult conversations. And I think we've got another poll for you. So what difficult conversations do leaders avoid the most? Jen's going to flash that poll for us. Is it about performance, accountability, behaviour, conflict, or organisational change? And all your results are coming through thick and fast. So what difficult conversations do leaders avoid the most? And you might be answering this off your own experience or even maybe your experience of other leaders. Is there a clear winner in this one? Yeah, maybe. Behaviour and conflict so far. So far we've got most of you have said behaviour and conflict. If you haven't responded and you want to, still got some time, we'll leave it up for another 10 seconds or so. Performance and accountability, only very few. It's coming up the lowest. All right. A little bit on org change. Behaviour and conflict. All right. That is interesting. I'm going to end the poll there. We'll get those results in a minute. So you should be able to see those results now. So you can see that behavior and conflict have come through, scoring the highest. Performance and accountability and all change, not so much. All right. So let's stay on behavior and conflict. That is what was it predicted. Good. All right. Can you tell me why? So in the chat, even if you did not answer that poll question with behavioral conflict, I'm curious why that would be a conversation that leaders tend to avoid. I'm not going to say avoid all the time. Why is that? Personal topics, yeah. Could be. Talking about behavior. Behavior feels more personal, yep. Because it can be seen as personal, yeah. Personal. People feel they uncomfortable, yeah. Yeah, behavior is, we don't always have, well, we may have some data points, and I would always encourage you to have a conversation about behavior with, even if it's anecdotal data, but with some data points and some proof points around what's happening there. But it's not always, statistically valid, because it could be your observation, it could be someone else's experience, it could be that we've misinterpreted, what was intended, etc. Yeah, difficult to measure. And we can be very, very concerned with damaging relationships and offending the person, right? However, and when do we do it? Like, when's the appropriate time to actually have a conversation with someone about it? We do know, though, that if we don't have those conversations about the behaviour, what can happen is that we leave leaders with a bunch of blind spots. And blind spots are really, really dangerous, right? So if you've ever taught a young person to drive, you'll know that teaching them about blind spots and doing the head check can absolutely be a lifesaver, right, when they're merging lanes. And it doesn't matter how fancy your car is, and even when your car comes up with a fancy triangle. My daughter's about to go for her driving test in a couple of weeks, and I say to her, head check, head check, head check. Now, the more senior you become in leadership, fun fact, the less likely people are to share blind spots with you, your blind spots. You might have heard me talk about this as parsley in the teeth. So you may be walking around with metaphorically parsley in the teeth, or something that you are doing that you're not aware of. And people may not be willing to give you that feedback because they are worried. There's a power inequity. There's the dynamic of you as the leader, you as the decision maker, you as the decider of promotion, remuneration increases, development opportunities, all the rest of it, right? The more senior you become, the more at risk you are in terms of seniority of leadership, of people not telling you that you've got parsley in your teeth. So we've said, behaviours, talking to people about their behaviours is one of the things that's most difficult, but it's one thing that we have to do. And this connects into culture. So if we be promoting that in teams, if we can be doing it as role models, as leaders, and equipping people with the right skills around having those feedback conversations about tricky topics like behaviour, then we're going to get higher levels of trust, high levels of engagement and commitment, ultimately productivity and performance. So we don't do all these things because yes, we do the things because it feels nice in organisation, but it's more than that. We do it for that, also that commercial, or that results, if commercial is not the right terminology in your organisation, but for the results that we're trying to achieve. So behaviour conflict are, and we're worried about conflict. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. We don't want them to experience an emotional reaction that's adverse or that maybe we can't deal with. Some of us are not great with tears, for example, in the workplace. Some of us are, some of us are not. We don't want to damage those relationships, which I think someone said in the chat. We might have lack of confidence. We might not be equipped, and but sometimes because of the reaction that we think we're going to get. The other thing on my list is leaders want to be liked. And I know that's a really simple thing to say. Most of you will be going, no, surely not. It's not about being liked, but we're all humans at the end of the day. We want to belong. We want to feel like we're part of a tribe, and being liked is a big part of that. And that is why sometimes we avoid these conversations, and they do impact trust. And sometimes, we kick the can down the road and we think this is going to resolve itself. I won't say anything on this occasion. I'll just let it go. I'll just let it go. I'll just let it go. Until someone, usually above you, says, well, you can't let this go anymore because now this is on you because you've let it go for too long, right? It's under your watch. So we've got to be able to move into those conversations, and we can still maintain trust and actually develop high levels of trust when we have these conversations. I'm going to give you a framework for this. And the framework is CLEAR, really easy to remember. It's an acronym. Now, clear is kind, which you see up on your screen, is not my quote. It's Brené Brown's quote. And I'm not sure how many of you follow Brené Brown's work. Whether you like her or not, I think she's got some extraordinary research and literature that backs up her frameworks, particularly around Dare to Lead. And this is one of them, clear is kind. And I love it because it's always a good reminder for me, and if I'm using it with others, that clarity, and we highlighted clarity earlier on in this conversation as something that is required in trust. But if we can be clear, then we are actually doing the right thing by that person. And then the difficulty of delivering the message becomes secondary to the need to be clear, right? So that's kind of the driving. We're doing it so we're clear with the person, so we can give them the best chance of really understanding the message that we need to give them, maybe the feedback. So we're going to clarify the issue first with the person. That's really important because we might say, I've got an issue with how you communicate with the rest of the team or how you communicate with customers. And the person might, like, what do we mean by communicate? Is it email? Is it the way we speak face to face? Is it messages? What is it? And that's an example, right? So we've got to be very, very clear with what it is that if we're talking about communication, what aspect of communication? So really clarify that issue. Lead with honesty. So if you have not observed the feedback or the thing, if you've not observed or been the recipient of the poor comms, then don't say, I've seen you do this, or I've had 20 people tell me that you've done this. Be honest. If it's one or two people, then say it's one or two people. Don't say who it is unless they've given you permission to do that. But lead with honesty. Tell them why you're addressing this issue. Why is it causing a problem? That is honesty, right? So you're giving them as much information as possible. You're exploring the perspectives. So to continue on this example of communication, we want to look at different ways that we can improve communication because we know that that's going to impact our experience, our customer experience, and our productivity because our team is going to feel better. So really look at the issue holistically rather than just from either your viewpoint or theirs. Agree on expectations. What are you expecting from them? When do you need this behavior to change? By when? What support are you going to give the person? So that expectations, there's a little bit of responsibility on you there too, not just on them. And then reinforce accountability and support. So let them know what you're expecting but also what you're going to do. So I'll check in with you again. We'll arrange a mentor or a coach. We've got an online module for you to do X, etc. Right? Hopefully that makes sense. But that principle there, clear is kind, is just a nice reminder. So these are all things that will help you, even though you're delivering a difficult message, you can still build trust. And that's going to reduce skepticism, right? Which is what we're talking about today. All right. So I talked about the trust credits, and that's why you've got the coins there on the screen. But trust, we've established it arrives on foot, it leaves on horseback. That means it's really, really hard to gain trust. It's really, really easy to lose. And if you think about any of your relationships in your life, whether professional or personal, I'm going to be pretty confident around this, but for most of you, it's very easy to remember the point where there was mistrust or where trust was lost. But I think it's harder for us to really pinpoint that moment where we knew we trusted somebody. Do you agree? If someone has done something where I feel that mistrust, boy, I can probably remember every single example of that, right? But where that trust has been built over time, it's really hard for me to go, I think it was February 25 when I knew that I trusted that person. It's not going to be the case because it's built over time in those small micro actions. Remember, those trust credits just continue to go in. It's repeated experiences. It's everyday behaviors. That consistency that we talked about, it's how we're communicating and what we choose to communicate. It's that accountability. Leadership visibility. Be around, be available. Don't drop the bomb of the big announcement and then kind of disappear for 3 hours. Walk around. You'd be surprised the number of leaders that do that. It's like, job done. I can cross it off my list. I've announced the thing. Be around. Fairness, which is a simple one, right? Should be self-explanatory. And then follow through. Check in. How are people going with that thing? These are all things that are going to help you to sustain that trust. All right, so team dynamics. Trust erodes. So we've talked a lot about trust in that, a little bit about culture, but more that one-to-one relationship. Trust erodes, trust does erode when teams experience some of these things that you'll see there. So unclear expectations, inconsistent leadership. We talked about these things, right? What you see on the right-hand side is our deliberate teams framework. So when we are working with organisations to help them build trust, we run a diagnostic across these 10 key factors, which you see in the diagram there. We then get real data in a heat map and survey sentiment data. We plot that and we design the workshop for your team. So where your team need some help with achievement and accountability, results focusing, and trust and psychological safety, will go great. They're the 3 things that are flashing up in red. So we'll do a deep dive into those things. Values and behaviours, execution and performance, it's coming out green. We don't ignore those things, and we do acknowledge for the team, these are strength areas for you, so here's what we do to sustain and maintain. But in terms of building out trust in a team, we look at it really comprehensively across these 10 factors, which cover a lot of what we've already talked about today. High trust teams have clear expectations, healthy accountability. Psychological safety, which I know has been mentioned in our chat. So Tara said it before, sometimes what stops us is psychological safety fears. Open communication, productive conflict. Conflict's good, but the right kind of conflict, and being able to discuss, debate in a way that's safe. It's very, very linked to psychological safety, and where we've got that leadership consistency, which is what today's all about. So we talked about teams. Now let's look at leaders. Last year I read Jacinda Ardern's autobiography. It is excellent, whether you're a Jacinda Ardern fan or not, and whether it doesn't really matter what side of politics you happen to be on. There's one of her quotes, one of the criticisms I've faced over the years is that I'm not aggressive enough or assertive enough. I refuse to believe you cannot be both compassionate and strong and effective, right? Is what I'd add to that. So she's a good example of what we think is a deliberate leader. So someone that's building trust consistently, addressing issues early, creating that clarity, leading with accountability, staying visible during uncertainty, and balancing empathy and performance. And you can do both. You don't have to be a complete I'm going to use an expletive, but a hard ass at the and without really empathy. So you can do both, and those things can both be true. I think she's a really good example of a good deliberate leader. So thank you for attending today. As we're finishing up, and we've got a couple of minutes for questions, so if you have questions, please pop them into the chat. I want to give you a gift because you've given me the gift of time today. You've given me an hour of your time. So I'd like to give you 45 minutes of my time. It'll probably stretch to an hour knowing me. So I like to have a bit of a chat. But if you click on that QR code there, gives you and I the opportunity to do a deep dive into your organisation around trust and around what's happening, in your team, but with your team too around trust. So that is a gift from me to you today. If you do want to, use the 45 minutes, we can have a look at what are some team friction points. What are some accountability gaps if they're there? Where might trust be leaking in your team? So does anyone have any questions? Because we've still got some time. Is there anything on your mind? I'm scanning chat, but if you want to unmute, please feel free to do so. We'll send you a copy of today's recording if you do want to go back and have a look. But with that, I want to say thank you very much for spending some time on a Monday. And I know Monday can be a very busy start to the week. Thank you for spending some time with me. I really appreciate it. And I'd love to see you again. So if you want to spend that 45 minutes, you are more than free to do so. I'd love to see you. Thanks, everyone.